Oh, that's better, thank you. Okay, just a reminder to you all, when we finish this, our final panel session, there'll be a networking reception, which will be held out there, to which everyone is invited to, so there'll be a chance to catch up there. Our final panel, and we're just getting our panelists mic'd up, who are going to come and join me shortly. And for this one, we're sticking to with the sustainability challenge facing the sector, but we're shifting the focus onto technology. And I'm delighted to be that I'll be joined in a moment by representatives from Pratt & Whitney, GE Aviation and Icelandair, and I will introduce them. If you could just give us a couple of minutes when their microphones are ready, they'll join me shortly. Cheers, Chris.
Great.
Thank you for joining me. Thank you for your patience, everyone. So I'm delighted to say we're joined by an esteemed panel here. So directly next to me, Chris Lorence, who's Chief Engineer at GE Aviation. On the far side there, we have Webb, who's Chief Sustainability Officer at Pratt & Whitney. And in the middle, we have Icelandair's Deputy COO, Heida Gudbrandsdottir. And I was a bit worried about the pronunciation, but I think I got Graham right, didn't I?
And Heida was perfect. So.
Oh, well, there you go.
Great job.
Excellent. So I'm no engineer, as will become alarmingly evident as this panel unfolds. So we have some really good expertise, knowledge, insights from what's going on at the moment. So I really would encourage questions from the floor, questions on Slido if there's any technology you want to ask the question about in terms of the practicalities, the challenges. This is a brilliant opportunity. So Slido would be a great place for that, and obviously I can take your questions in the room. But just to kind of get us started, obviously, we heard a lot there about policy and a lot about SAF. Were there any kind of takeaways from that one, from what you heard on that?
Well, I guess I would start by saying clearly infrastructure is a key topic of dialogue. We're going to talk here in this panel about technology, and that's certainly a critical element, but the technology maturation, the certification processes, and the infrastructure are all going to have to converge on a timeline for us to have a solution as an industry.
Mm. And any thoughts from further down the line there?
Yeah, I second that, and also just focusing on the balance we need to see in the industry between the measures that are available to the industry as an hard-to-abate sector, and then the regulation that is being imposed, and maybe increasing the understanding that we need to have between these two.
Yes, and I would state that, and as well, we have to take into account, all of the collective partnership that we have to have, not only here in Europe, but across the globe to make it all happen. And the level of alignment that we've seen today is really remarkable in light of the challenges that we've seen in our industry as a whole with COVID, and now the recovery, and then now, of course, the war in Ukraine. And what we need to always make sure of is that we're not losing our focus on the goal of making ourselves achieve net zero by 2050.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when we look at, when we think about technology, it's easy to get carried away and look many years ahead, and we will do that. We will have that opportunity. But obviously, there's a huge number of aircraft flying today, and perhaps I could start maybe. Chris, what are you guys? How much gains can you make today from the existing aircraft that are flying out there, and what's sort of realistic to expect there?
So I think if you keep in context what this industry has done over a period of time, if you go back to the 1970s, every 15 or 20 years, we've seen a 15 to 20% reduction in CO2 emissions with every generation of aircraft. And I don't know of another industry sector that has that kind of track record of technology delivery and impact to the environment and the public at large. When we think about the future, we think, if anything, that curve is going to accelerate. Last June, we announced with our partners at Safran the CFM Rise open fan architecture, which we believe is going to show an over 20% reduction in CO2 from the current class engines, our LEAP engine. That really is going to be a game changer in terms of technology maturation, and we plan to fly that in the middle of this decade to demonstrate the capabilities at scale. So I think I'm very optimistic that the additional technologies, hybrid electric and so on beyond that, will only allow us to innovate faster than we have in the past.
And Graham, from your side, again, what are you doing today, or what can you do with the existing aircraft?
We continue to work a suite of technologies, and they will span across multiple time frames. We're in the process now of certifying our latest addition to our geared turbofan engine family. We call that the Advantage, and that will enter into service in the mid-20s and achieve another reduction from what we've already delivered in our geared turbofan engine, which was 16% from prior standards. And in addition, we're working in our other product families, because we have turboprops as well. We have a Pratt & Whitney 127 XT that we just announced, which will achieve another 3% reduction while also reducing maintenance cost. So we're continuing to work technologies across the near term, and then that coupled with the SAF that we've had the discussion on is the near-term plan for decarbonization of the industry.
And Heida, for Icelandair, can you make more out of your existing aircraft, and where does the roadmap go?
I think, firstly, just looking at what has been happening on this front in the last couple of years, it's been good to see the IATA goals put forth for a net zero by 2050. And we've also seen airlines pushing for more ambitious goals to the shorter term, maybe around 2030 or so. And Icelandair has certainly done this, presented its updated goal of achieving a 50% reduction per OTK by 2030 as compared to 2019. And generally speaking, airlines are leaning to the four pathways for reaching these goals, being new technology that's realized through a new fleet, and then you have operational efficiencies, of course SAFs, and last but not least offsetting, because it is an industry that's hard to abate. But I would say, focusing on the operational efficiencies, this is something that is in the DNA of airlines, focusing on fuel efficiency. They all have strong fuel efficiency programs, and there you can talk about things such as pilot best practice, modifications to the aircraft, and of course flight planning. And I can't mention flight planning without referring to the single European sky. So there are advancements to be made, definitely. But the largest achievements are probably through new technology.
And new technology is something that Icelandair is already looking at?
Yes, definitely. We last year signed a couple of LOIs with two companies, Universal Hydrogen and Heart Aerospace. And Heart Aerospace is a Swedish company that's developing a 19-seater full electric aircraft. And we have sort of been exploring how this would fit into our domestic network, because being from Iceland, you have a lot of short distances and all below about 500 kilometers or so. And this could also open up a different network. You could serve a smaller populations, smaller destinations, basically. So that's exciting. And then we have been working with universal hydrogen, with conversions for the DAS 8 Q200 or 300. And there we're looking at the full chain, everything from how the operational landscape would have to change, basically, in order to facilitate this project. And the exciting part here is that these are projects that would bring us to true zero in domestic aviation.
And Chris, from when you're looking at the new technologies that you're looking at right now, which ones excite you? Which ones do you see the potential in?
So I think our strategy is to make sure we're pursuing multiple paths. So if I think about our strategy overall, it really reflects three things. One, advanced architectures like the RISE open fan I mentioned earlier. The second, around hybrid electric and how we take more advantage of electric aircraft and managing that. And then third, hydrogen. And so we see a path where all three of those could come together, maybe two, maybe other two, but we want to make sure that we have all our options available. All of them are very promising, including others that we work in addition, of course, SAF and technology supporting that. So we believe now is a time where you should be keeping your options open and let them mature at the rate that they're going to mature.
And Graham, a similar view from your side?
I would say that we absolutely have a very similar strategy in our approach. We're looking at multiple differentiating technologies, which include hybrid electric. We now have a demonstrator program working on a Dash 8 with de Havilland and our partners, Collins Aerospace, which are going to drive potentially 30% improvement for that level size of an aircraft. And starting small in these aircraft is actually a benefit because we can work through all of these technical difficulties and ensure we're working with the regulators to make sure that we can certify these aircraft with the required level of safety into the future. And so we're taking that approach, which we will then translate into the larger engines. And we look at and are working actively on electrification and hybrid electric of our geared turbofan engine products, and we see those coming into the mid-2030 timeframe. And then, as Chris indicated, we're also looking at hydrogen and its challenges, but also its benefits. It obviously is a fuel that is not containing carbon and does not emit carbon dioxide when you burn it, but in the end, it's a cryogenic fluid, and that creates a tremendous amount of challenges, but also the opportunity to make use of it for superconducting that would juice up the hybrid electric component. But obviously, that would be a longer range technology that would require additional maturation and time.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to also talk about this in terms of how and where the technology is applied. Because who here is familiar with opening a browser, taking a look at the news, and you see a headline saying hydrogen aviation is far away, 2 or 3 decades. And 10 seconds later, you open another one, and it's the hydrogen age is upon us. So you're getting a lot of conflicting messages, basically. And what we see through these projects that we're looking at is that we see them as a means to get to new technology faster and learning from it, maturing from it. Both from a regulatory perspective, it has to, of course, meet certain certification processes, but also the infrastructure. There you have longer, slower investments. And then, last but not least, from the operational perspective, what kind of operational readiness do we as airlines have to prepare to be able to then accept new technology as it appears?
And it's interesting, you talk about hydrogen. There was an interesting poll on Slido. I don't know if we can get that back up for me. There, where we asked people, put the question on what the time frame would be for a hydrogen for a single aisle aircraft. I think it was tied somewhere between 2035 and 2040. Does that sound realistic?
I think that's certainly a realistic time frame. We announced just a couple of weeks ago a partnership between CFM and Airbus, where we're going to demonstrate a full-scale hydrogen-powered engine on their A4E testbed, and that's going to fly in the middle of this decade. That we think is a key enabler to what would be a potential product offering in that time frame.
Yes, 2040 seems to be just about the favourite. 7% of people think never. So there's clearly, you know, and that's the thing with you know, totally new technology. You have a lot to prove. Graham, does that sort of time frame look reasonable to you? 2035, 2040?
Absolutely. You know, we would agree. You know, with the time frame, there's technology challenges that have to occur. You know, obviously, as I mentioned with the hybrid electric challenge, you want to start small and build up larger, and there's multiple reasons for that: the level of challenge, the level of difficulty, but also the risk that's associated with it. But underlying this capability is, and I think what we've been discussing is from the perspective of the propulsion systems. But underlying all of that has got to be the infrastructure, and we really have to make the transition from what we're doing today in terms of making hydrogen using reforming of methane, which is a very, shall we say, not very clean process. And so you're going to have to rely not only on the engine and aircraft technology that's required to make these fuels possible as a primary fuel, but also the underlying infrastructure for the development of green hydrogen and its widespread distribution to a large number of airports, because you have to have hydrogen on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And that technical challenge, I mean, what would you see as the biggest technical hurdle for hydrogen?
I agree with Graham. I think that, you know, you're talking about an entirely new infrastructure for hydrogen, the generation, transportation, connection. I think actually the technical challenges around burning hydrogen in the engine and storing it, I'm not as concerned about that. We have at GE, you know, 8 million operational hours in land-based gas turbines where we've been running on hydrogen. We're very encouraged by the results we've seen so far. So I think that's a technical challenge that's achievable. But when you start doing the math on how many different airports, how much volume do you need, storing it in cryogenic tanks, you know, that's going to be, I think, one of the biggest hurdles for the industry to overcome when it comes to hydrogen.
Yeah, and a lot of these, I mean, as Icelandair, as an airline looking to utilize some of these technologies or help drive them, you know, something like hydrogen, I mean, how worrying or how easily do you think you as an airline can even address those, or do you feel a bit it's out of your control?
I think coupled with what I mentioned earlier about looking at certain applications or business models related to the technology, you also have to look at locations. As an example, Iceland, 100% renewable energy, just the geographical location. It's tempting to start thinking about the opportunities that could lie in the future when we are trying to sort of expand technology, say from hybrid, for instance, an aircraft running on maybe partially electric, partially SAF, for instance. So definitely power in getting to the innovation fast, quickly. Of course, always adhering to safety, and it has to be economically viable, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that safety challenge is huge for emerging technologies, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, we in the industry have a very proud track record of safety, and for myself at Pratt Whitney, and I'm sure for Chris at GE, safety is a non-negotiable. And so we have processes that we use to mature technologies to the point where we can insert them in and demonstrate them at the required scale and also within the relevant environment, which then enables us to enter that technology into a product development that will ultimately be certified. So unfortunately, that process does take some time because of the elements of ensuring that the technology delivers what we're anticipating, and it has the required level of safety, and it provides the required level of value to the end customers.
And
completely agree. You know, there are many things that we compete upon within the industry. Safety is not one of them. You know, that is a standard that we all strive to ensure is common for us all. It will take some time. We work closely with the EASA and the FAA to understand the regulations, and I think they've been very good partners in trying to advance the broad industry goals, with always safety being the first requirement.
And in terms of that regulatory environment, I mean, what do you need, you know, to kickstart some of these technologies or their implementation? What do you need from policymakers? What do you need to see out there that would help drive that development?
So I think we have heard throughout the day today that the element of regulatory uncertainty is a difficult environment to invest in. And so certainly the more encouraged we are by having a path to certify some of these new technologies, understand the standards that will be required, for example, hybrid electric, and what will be required not just for small applications but larger ones, so that we all understand what the rules are going to be, then that gives us a much better platform to be able to compete effectively and get to the best outcome.
It's tempting also to look at, there's a multitude of projects going on, a lot of design work from innovative companies, and you know, focusing on the partnerships that you can create around these endeavors. There would be a lot of value in tightening the design with the regulatory frameworks, with the parties responsible for infrastructure and operators, sort of creating a collaborative effort to solve this issue. So I think there's advancements to be made there as well.
And I think it's interesting, we have another of our snap polls in which we've asked which of the following innovations will make the biggest difference in decarbonisation of the aviation sector. So probably not a surprise that SAF's at 64%, almost 2/3 of it dominating, and actually not even, opinion pretty divided over hydrogen electric aircraft and carbon capture technologies. Is that a reminder that we're, maybe Graham on this one, is that a reminder that we are dealing with really advanced step change? You know, that SAF is at least something that we can see today. People have been working around SAF for ages. It is more of a business case
It's
issue,
a mature technology.
Yeah.
It's a mature technology that basically all the technology has been proven and ready, but nonetheless it's suffering from a cost or a commercial challenge. And as has been discussed at length today, there are multiple approaches to address that challenge and to incentivize additional availability of sustainable aviation fuels and making sure that the price gap that currently exists closes so that we can stimulate producers, energy producers such as BP, to make more of it so that we can then have the airlines take it and have products that myself at Pratt Whitney and others, we're making sure that our engines are going to be compatible with those fuels regardless of the pathway or the feedstock. And there's 7 that have been approved today, and we've been founding members of the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative, as Chris and GE have. And collectively, we've been working through the industry to mature this SAF technology starting in 2006, testing engines, ensuring its compatibility, understanding the challenges, and then at the same time approving additional pathways as they are identified to help expand the number of SAFs that are available, which Andrea mentioned is a benefit for what she wants to accomplish, but also enables the cost to be reduced as a result because of the scaling.
Going to one of the questions we've had on Slido, so this is quite an interesting one. What do you see as the potential for hybrid electric and hydrogen-powered aircraft as a percentage of emissions reductions in 2050? Which is that's quite a tough one, but it's nice to have. I guess it shows what people everywhere are after something tangible, aren't they? Some kind of tangible sign.
I read somewhere. Oh, sorry.
Well, I can give my view on this. I will say this, that a hybrid electric and hydrogen-powered aircraft is potentially nirvana, because we recently have partnered with the Department of Energy through their A4E and come up with a concept we call HySight, which is a hydrogen-fueled, steam-injected, intercooled turbine engine. And it basically is enabling us to take the value from the cryogenic fluid of hydrogen, not only its energy density, and basically extract more efficiency from the cycle by taking the exhaust, condensing water, and there's more water in burning hydrogen than there is in kerosene, and then converting that to steam using the waste heat, capturing that in an overall cycle benefit, and we're seeing 35% just from that cycle benefit alone relative to our current Gear turbofan engine, and I haven't accounted for the benefit that could be accomplished with using superconducting materials to reduce the weight and also improve the efficiency of the hybrid electric component, so that's not been added into my estimates.
And Heida, I think you were
I wanted just to comment on the overall impact. It's estimated that around 50% or so of all legs. They're under 4,000 kilometers or so. So bridging the Atlantic could be within reach if we were reaching longer range with hybrid electric aircraft or a hybrid technology where you're coupling with SAF, for instance. So there's a huge potential there, at least in terms of emissions.
I think the most disruptive technologies working on initially will work their way up from regional and narrow-body applications. We saw the numbers earlier of 50% being the long-haul missions. It really becomes a question of how quickly can we develop those and scale them to a wide-body application where you start to get the real emissions reduction improvement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Another question we've had come in. The technology is one challenge, but securing green hydrogen supplies for aviation is another. Are you concerned that the low quantities and high expense of green hydrogen will harm uptake of the new technology? Anyone want to jump in on this?
I guess what I would say to start with is I think watching how the SAF generation happens over the next 5 to 10 years will really be the indicator on this. I think if we all can coalesce around an approach to really provide the supply for SAF, we'll have a great model to say how do we replicate the same for hydrogen. Taking advantage of all the infrastructure that's in place, all that sort of thing, we should be able to do SAF first and then be able to apply the same model to hydrogen.
I would maybe start with the point that, again, focus on strategic locations, gain the knowledge from that, and then look at how you can bring new technology faster to the market. We heard earlier that the existing technology today, about 30% of it has reached actual operators. That is something we should be focusing on, and generally just how we can accelerate this transfer of knowledge directly to the market into operation.
I think we touched on that in the beginning, that obviously green hydrogen is the challenge. Today's hydrogen supply, only 1% or less is green, and so obviously that is a key risk to what we're trying to accomplish. But nonetheless, despite that challenge, we do see that there is a drive to go and make green electrons that would then be used to make green hydrogen. And also that would be a feedstock for making green or power to liquid sustainable aviation fuel. And so it is one of the key technologies, and as Chris stated, we're actively monitoring all of those developments as we also continue to work the technologies that would take advantage of those at the same time. Because we think it's going to happen, it's a matter of when, and we want to be prepared.
And I think from a policy standpoint, this dialogue about what is the best mix of mandates and incentives that provides the most acceleration to development of the technology and supply, that's going to be pivotal for hydrogen generation.
So just one last one to end with. Karen, there's so much more ground we could cover. 2035, I mean, what do we think are likely to be the kind of engine propulsion technologies available by that stage?
So I think we're very encouraged by what we're seeing in the open fan. If you look at our roadmap of having an open fan demonstrator in the middle of the decade, a hybrid electric demonstrator in the middle of the decade, a hydrogen demonstrator in the middle of the decade, 3 full-scale flight demonstrations, not white papers, not lab experiments, full-scale demonstrations partnered with the largest airframe manufacturers in the world. We're very encouraged by how much of that could show up in a product in 2035.
And Graham?
Well, in my case, I'm looking across a spectrum of size propulsion systems, and so certainly by then we will see a full electrified in the small, say less than 10 passenger side. I think that's going to be a feasible reality by that time frame. We certainly see that in, shall we say, the 20 to 50 passenger size aircraft, there's a potential to see hybrid electric aircraft be available in that time frame. And then in our case, we see our competitors working on geared turbofan engines. We're working on geared turbofan engines, and we certainly say that by 2035 we would see geared turbofan engines still present. Obviously, We would then be inserting advanced materials and advanced aerodynamic technologies to make the current generation even better. And obviously, we will also hybridize that and have a hybrid electric solution. So that's at least what our vision is for that mid-2030 timeframe.
And Heida, Icelandair, what are people going to be flying in 2035?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, that's around the time frame when the next generation aircraft is due. So the airlines will be looking for picking up this new technology to realize the potential. So we'll be on the lookout.
That's brilliant. Chris, Graham, and Heida, I really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you. Okay, so that's it from me. Before I go, I'd like to thank all my colleagues at FlightGlobal and DVV, as well as Thomas and Jennifer and all the team at A4E for their help and support today. Big thank you to all our sponsors, to Airbus, to Air BP, Boeing, GE Aviation, Pratt & Whitney, Rolls-Royce, Embraer, BOC Aviation, and Panasonic. A reminder, our networking reception will be held outside, so you're very welcome to that. And with that, I'll leave the last word to Thomas.
Thank you, Graham.